Many say President Calderon's visit to Arlington National Cemetery is a sign that times are changing for the United States and its neighbor. But in the midst of the battle over immigration reform, others question what role Mexicans really have in this country. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is immigration activist Ron Gochez. So, Ron, first of all, you're also a high school social studies teacher. Tell me a little bit about what you see when it comes to military recruitment at your school.
Right. Well, what we see is a lot of military recruiters, especially in communities of color where people, don't have the resources to go to college immediately without maybe perhaps the assistance of some type of financial aid. So we see that the military recruiters really come into the schools and communities of color, low-income communities much more, and really recruit these kids who really sometimes don't have other options other than the military. So we always try to encourage our kids to seek higher education, try to go to college first before any other option.
Right, and I read that somewhere that you had written about the tanks and the camouflage people coming into the school cafeterias and stuff, and you also wrote about the quote-unquote Operation Brown Shield and how that shield will be thrown out to the front lines to defend the United States. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Definitely, when you look at the statistics on the numbers of both African-American and Latino soldiers and Native American soldiers since Vietnam, since even the Korean War, our numbers in the United States, and then if you look at our numbers in the military, the number of deaths of U.S. soldiers, they're very disproportionate when you look at the African-American and Latino communities. Although we only represented, for example, in Vietnam, 11% of the U.S. population was African-American, but African-Americans represented 22% of the deaths in Vietnam. So what we're saying is that our communities, our kids, are thrown at the very front, and they form what is really like an Operation Brown Shield. So the Black and Latino people at the very front, they're going to suffer the heaviest losses, the heaviest consequences. And what we're saying is when we come back to our communities, our ghettos, our barrios, our communities aren't any better. And in fact, we have kids today fighting in Iraq, trying to fight other people over there, and at the same time their families here in the United States are being threatened with deportation. Their own families here are under attack for being brown. I mean, imagine people from Arizona who are fighting people in Iraq or Afghanistan who are brown, and back home they themselves are being targeted and persecuted for being brown. So these are very heavy contradictions that we simply cannot ignore, and that's why I think it's important that we focus on this and tell our students you should go to college before any other options.
And why do you think those numbers exist? Do you think the United States military is targeting these groups in their recruitment practices?
Oh, without a doubt. In the Spanish television channels, you see multi-million-dollar campaigns aimed at our community. Where I saw one commercial where they even play on the family structure. They play on a Mexican family watching the soccer game, and then the daughter goes up to the roof and fixes the antenna, and then 10 years later, it's that same girl who turns into a woman who's fixing the satellite for the U.S. military. So they definitely target our communities more, and they know that especially now because of this immigration debate, they're trying to lure our kids with the promises of some kind of documentation. They're saying, if you sign here, if you join the U.S. military, we'll give you and your family papers. So we're saying not only is that not true, we're seeing soldiers now who are having their families deported. We're seeing U.S. military veterans who have been deported after serving for their country. So we're telling the kids to be very careful, not just at the schools, but in general, anybody. We're telling people to be very careful about these promises, and a lot of times false promises from the U.S. military campaign recruiters who are targeting our communities.
And I want to talk a little bit about the Mexican president's visit to Washington, D.C. today. He is expected to visit Arlington National Cemetery tomorrow. And obviously, as I'm sure you know, a Mexican president hasn't visited the cemetery since 1914 after the invasion of Veracruz. Now, many American Marines who participated in that military intervention are buried in the cemetery. Why do you think Calderon is now visiting the cemetery? And how is the Mexican-American community where you are reacting to this visit?
Well, first of all, the president of Mexico coming to the United States, we know that he's trying to push for immigration reform like a lot of other people are. And we know that, for the history of the Mexican people in this part of the United States, obviously for Mexicans to join the U.S. military is to join the same military that took half of the Mexican territory. So when kids today join that military, they really are joining the military that fought against their own communities from 1846 to 1848 during the U.S. invasion of Mexico. Now, for Calderon to come visit, obviously he's showing that the Mexican people here in the United States, not only are they exploited for their labor in factories and in the workplace, but also Latinos and immigrants in general serve in the U.S. military armed forces. And he's saying that, and this is something that I agree with, how can the U.S. government say they want to get rid of immigrants, but they actively recruit immigrants into the armed forces? In fact, there's been cases where military recruiters have crossed the border and have gone down into Tijuana, Baja California, to recruit kids from high schools in Tijuana. So for them to say that they don't target our community is a lie. So I think like Calderon is trying to prove a point that if they want us to fight in their military, then they should legalize our communities here in the United States.
Well, Ron, that's all the time we have for now, but we're going to continue to update our viewers on Calderon's visit to the cemetery.